So we're going to talk about the window of tolerance in the polyvagal nervous system. This is by Porges. He's a medical doctor who came up with this and later translated it into therapy. So here we go. We're going to start off by talking about the polyvagal nervous system. It's done by Porges. He's a medical doctor who created this, and later it got translated into basically affect tolerance and how people can regulate different things. And on here, on this top right picture, you can see these web-like forms that go all the way from the top of the head all the way back down to the tailbone. Its main job, this is your nervous system, its main job is to pick up on stress. We see other people stressed out, we tend to mirror that. We're going to become stressed out. Someone's yelling and we stay calm, eventually they're going to start calming down to us to stay regulated. Not all the time, but for the most part, that's kind of how it works. And you can see how it kind of goes in different areas of the body and whatnot. But the main point of this is to figure out, have clients pick up on what's going on in their body and so they can change it. So we're going to keep going with this. So what is the window of tolerance? Generally speaking, this is when your brain's functioning well. You're thinking through things, you're problem solving, you're staying calm without overreacting to situations even if they're stressful. And this is kind of where people stay in this healthy window. And even if things come up, they figure a way through it. So for example, let's say a kid's screaming and knocking on the door as you're trying to have a very important conversation with your significant other. And you hear this knock, 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 and you're also trying to talk, and at the same time the other significant other is getting really stressed out. And the person that stays in the window of tolerance would be the one to display coping skills where they're going to go and say, hold on a second, let me take care of this, and I'll come right back and we'll finish this conversation. They go deal with the kids or whatever the stimuli is, and they come back and then they continue on. They're not becoming overly overwhelmed. But there are times where they will jump out of their window of tolerance into, instead of this healthy range, they might jump into a higher state of hyper-arousal or sympathetic nervous system where they do fight, flee, or freeze. But it's not very consistent. It's very rare or they do it on rare occasions when they have more extreme situations happening. Or the hypo, which is moving to a more shut down state, or parasympathetic nervous system, or hypo-arousal. So we're going to go through each one of those. So the window of tolerance basically means you're regulating your affect, regardless of what's kind of going on. So let's just give you a quick overview real quick. This is what we call the window of tolerance. It's within this healthy range, which we're going to talk about more of how to recognize. People tend to kind of fluctuate in it where they can feel very stressed and depressed and those type of things, activate and whatnot, but it's still within a healthier range. Stress is actually a healthy thing for us. It gets us to do things. Same with shutting us down when we're working too much. It says, hey, I need to take a nap, or those things. It tells our body kind of what to do. So we're reflecting kind of what our body needs, our mind needs, and our thinking needs. Emotional, cognitive, physical. So it's kind of where it goes in the window of tolerance with that. And there's other states where people, when they're in the window of tolerance, they tend to fluctuate in between these ranges and pretty much stay in there pretty consistently. But on occasion, they'll jump up and over into a high aroused state or whatnot, where maybe they're asked to give a presentation like this one at work, and like, oh wait, I'm usually regulated, but this one makes me nervous. I might need to do some breathing skills to come back down to this healthy range, and that's pretty normal. Or they might feel like, oh, I've been working so much and it's just too much going on. You kind of feel like shutting down. People can go into this hypo-aroused state, but it usually only lasts for a short period of time. It's not something that's consistent where people stay stuck, and that's what healthy range is within this window of tolerance, or that people who have a big window. So moving on to the next part. Alright, so we're going to start out with the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system, which is this one on the very top, is the state of mind where you become hyper-aroused. You become impulsive, you have racing thoughts, you have a lot of muscle tension, you don't sleep very well, or sleep too much sometimes if you kind of stay up all night and then crash all day. And people go in the fight, flight, or freeze response. And this is kind of what we call the amygdala. You're seeing danger, the polyvagal is picking up on it and saying, no, I need to do something about this, and we tend to go into more of a panicked response. With people with this, they're constantly anxious, or they're jumping around jobs all the time. Their relationships are really stressful and anxious all the time. They're always pointing out flaws or things not going right, kind of like criticism in a way, or whatnot. And with this, I like to think of this one kind of like analogy I like using. It's the fire alarm analogy, where let's say I'm going home and I'm cooking Thanksgiving dinner, and I forget to set an alarm, and later I hear this fire alarm, beep, 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 it's going off, and I'm going to check what the culprit is. I open that oven, like, what is it? Oh, there it is. Yep, that's right, burnt chicken. I didn't set the alarm, and well, I'm going to take it out, I'm going to put it somewhere so it's not continuing to burn, whatnot, and, you know, the fire alarm doesn't know if it's a perceived or real danger. It just knows, hey, smoke equals danger, do something. And I'm going to beep. And beeping means something's dangerous or something's wrong. And we do something about it. And that's a really healthy thing to be doing. But when we're always in that state of mind of thinking everything's danger, we think everything's real danger when it's more of a perceived thing, that's a constant stress. Think about if you've had trauma and now you're going to sleep, and you're staying in a state of mind where you're still anxious, or still trauma responses in your state of sleep, in the REM sleep. You're going to toss and turn a lot, you're going to get very little sleep, you're going to be very irritable the next morning. And usually when I ask clients, like, hey, like, how much sleep did you get? I got about 6 hours. Well, how many times did you toss and turn? Well, I don't know, about 5-6 times. How much sleep do you felt like you got? About an hour. Your body can't keep that up. It can't keep up the state of mind where it's got to keep functioning on low sleep, and yet a lot of things you're doing in a day. And we're expecting clients to, yeah, we need you to do court, we need you to do a job, we need you to do treatment, all these, deal with your kids, all these different things, but yet we need to regulate clients first. If we're not regulating them, getting them stabilized, getting their basic needs first, you're not going to do very good in therapy. It's just true as they're not stabilized enough to care about emotions. And people in the sympathetic nervous system, they'll tend to go to drugs or impulsive behaviors or whatnot in order to regulate. They're not always choosing wise choices. You're not thinking clearly. I like thinking of this one kind of like the cloudy mind. It kind of feels like you are cloudy when you're thinking, kind of just out of there or out of it. Okay, that's hyper-arousal. Now we're going to talk about the other part, which is the hypo-arousal. Hypo-arousal is a state where people shut down. They tend to go into more of a depressed affect. A lot of times I see a lot of people guilting or shaming because of choices they may have made in life. They have issues remembering things. They become dissociative. They can't concentrate. It looks very much like depression majority of the time. And a lot of the time when people start shaming themselves, they become to a point where they start forming negative beliefs or those type of things in their life. And it's kind of interesting because people will go in these fluctuations where they'll start out, things are going fine, and then a friend says, like, that hat looks funny on you, and then people drop, and it's really depressing. They'll zone out or just numb out or whatnot, or they'll get very stressed, one or the other. And then they'll try to work their way back up and jump around in these states of mind. But for the most part, we want to teach clients, like, we don't have to take some of these comments or responses clients are giving us and making them so extreme in our lifestyle. Maybe we need to find ways to change our environment, change the people we're around, change some of those, or if not change, how do we make it more safe? One or the other, but still have to do some sort of change if we're going into these extreme states all the time. They have such a small window when you have trauma, and what we're trying to do is figure out what ways can we build this up. And some people will actually get to the point where You know, in sessions, I actually tend to notice, did they give me eye contact or not, or how are they walking, or when they're sitting in group therapy, are they clenching up and kind of holding their body, or they give me this parasympathetic response, or they give me a very anxious response where they're rocking in the chair, tapping their feet, or whatnot, or you know, we might even look at the breathing. And I like the qigong, which is basically a breathing style or exercise even. Well, I'll get them to think of their diaphragm and think of it as this: breathe in and push it out. You know, you're kind of getting them to pull air in and push it out. You're kind of actually opening up that rib cage, getting them to do something about it. Square breathing. Breathing in 4 seconds. Holding for 4 seconds. Breathing out. Holding for 4 seconds. And so forth. And I tell them to do it about 3 times because that's about how many times it takes to regulate. And if you're noticing people breathing in like I might have just done, where they raise their shoulders up, they're not breathing in their diaphragm, they're breathing into their shoulders or their upper body. We want them to breathe into their stomach. It's something that I still have to work with myself on occasion, so I have to pay really close attention to that. Triangle breathing, when people are having panic attacks, we want to get people into triangle breathing, where you have them quickly breathe in and hold for 4 seconds. So they're breathing in, holding for a couple seconds, forcing it out, and holding it for 4 seconds basically. And that one gets them out of a panic response, or if they're having flashbacks or impulsive thoughts or nightmares, get them to do some breathing exercises. It changes the physiology of the body. Change the physiology, it helps change emotions, helps change the thoughts, helps change the behavioral response. And this is something that we want to get them in a condition of doing regularly, so that way they can function a lot more healthily. And that's kind of some things to think about, where to start. So let's move to the next slide. Okay, so I changed the pictures on these, and we're going to look at the sympathetic nervous system real quick. So where people are very hyper-aroused, and if they're in an environment where they feel like their nervous system's in a constant state of not feeling safe, or it can't detect safety, it's going to be in a fight, flight, freeze response. And it's kind of where they're going to have like a very low threshold to react. They're going to be people constantly going up and down into this state. And you know, where they might see a person with a neutral face or very calm, they might think, oh, they don't care. Or someone who's fearful, thinking, oh my gosh, like they hate me. Or someone who's very anxious, they're going to feel like, oh, I'm like burdening this person. They're doing something they don't want to do, and I'm making them do that, and they might have difficulty with that. What if a person like has never had a history of actually getting help, and here we are having them get help, and they're seeing you anxious? Or your attachment style, your anxiousness, well, it's going to be very uncomfortable for them if they learn to not get help and be very independent if the world's not safe. So we need to pay attention to some of these things and talk even to therapists, case managers, secretaries. How are we becoming different regulations of our emotions in front of them? And if they don't have skills to do this, you know, basically in essence, they're learning that you're not safe and it's not safe to get help. And that doesn't mean that you're not a safe person, but that's what they may be picking up on. And also we want to look at a few things I notice with clients. I tend to watch for how are they walking, how is their eye contact, how is their breathing, those things, like I said in the previous thing. This is something to get them regulated. You can use mindfulness in sessions before you start the session even. Using mindfulness brings them to a window of tolerance, a calm state, and then you're going to start out with trauma work. Well, you want to get them calm if they're an anxious person first. And also leave them with mindfulness or some other techniques before they leave. So that way they come and they go regulated. And eventually this is going to become a natural thing that they're going to do on their own. And now we kind of want to think about a few other things. Is what if that person isn't able to leave their environment? They're stuck. They can't leave. They're kind of confined to it. this is kind of where people can go into that fight, flight, freeze, but sometimes it's the freeze response where they shut down and feel like they can't get much movement, or think like a car. They're in a car and they can't leave the car when it's moving, or they're stuck in traffic, or they're on a plane, or in the bathroom. They feel this danger response. And it's not like their nervous system has a choice over it. It's just going to do what it's supposed to do. And we gotta. And there are times for us to jump in these extreme realms. For, let's say we're crossing the road and a bus is coming at us. Well, we need to move. We can't just stay there. That's dangerous. So I might have my sympathetic nervous system and amygdala go off saying, "Hey, here's a bus. What do we do with that?" And it goes to the hippocampus where we store memory. Oh yeah, that means move. Dangerous thing. Or if we shut down, whatnot. I've heard clients where they've been raped and they say, "I didn't move, I didn't fight at all, and I didn't know," and I'm having shame or guilt over that. What if that was their body? Not saying that's what we want to happen, but what if that's what their body and mind told them that was safest, is to freeze? And sometimes we need to normalize what our nervous system does, because we don't always have control over it in the beginning if we're not regulated or have learned skills to do so. All right, now we're going to move to the next slide. So coming back to what we were talking about before, hyper and hypo-arousal. Now that we know what they are, let's talk about what do we do with that. When I have this stimulus and I'm feeling flooded and become very anxious, what are some skills to bring me down? Breathing skills, mindfulness. There's some where maybe they go on a walk and just get out of hypo-arousal with getting that movement. I like to think of hyper-arousal, how do we slow down the client? And hypo, how do we get them in movement or speed up? There's a lot of resources for this that we're going to talk about later in this, but for the most part right now we just need to find some simple skills. So breathing skills are one of the basic essential things that we need to get them working on. We need to get them regulated with how many meals are they eating. We want to at least get them to 2 meals so that way their mood stabilizes. How much sleep are they getting? That also affects serotonin in the brain with the moon. So getting them to a point where we can even get them housing, that's going to be a huge change in their functioning. So this is where we want to do case management, a lot of stabilization skills, and then into the processing. All right, so on this slide I've actually added this scale to this side here, and you can decide if it's for you. I use it personally myself. A person in a healthy range is going to be +3 to -3. That's a healthy range for a window of tolerance, and we want to get them to build that window of tolerance with that +1, +2 before they dysregulate into a higher functioning state, that higher window, building it up. And so I usually do it on a scale system, so I can constantly ask them. When I'm asking a client these things over and over again, it's to bring awareness. It's to help them discover what is happening when I'm jumping into these realms. 0 is a normal state, most boring day. Basically, things are not positive or negative. They just feel like neutral. +5, I might feel like I'm going to do something impulsive, or I'm going to hang out with friends that may not be healthy for me, just so I can get that acceptance and kind of get that feeling of like, this feels good, kind of the oxytocin going in. How do I get connection? And sometimes that's good, but it can be very unhealthy too. We want to check who are their support systems. Kind of looking at the +5, this is where people, even when they feel really great, that can be a trigger too for them to actually want to use drugs. I'm feeling this good, why not feel even better? It can be a trigger, so we need to teach them how to come to a more regulated state when they're doing that. When they're beyond a -3, let's look at -5. Maybe suicidal thoughts are there. Maybe they're having negative beliefs, or shutting themselves down, or being very irritable or hurtful toward others, being very contemptuous. I always ask in groups, hey, where's your breathing? What are you noticing about your breathing? Oh, is it very shallow, or is it racing? Are they shut down, or are they hyper-aroused? So we kind of need to help them figure that out in the beginning, bringing that awareness. And I actually use these numbers, and I start out with 0 because it's the easiest and then I start out with the +5 and -5. I start out with the extremes because they can recognize extremes. That's something they're living in. What they're not used to is these regulated numbers, which is what we're working on building. And they may need help figuring out skills or supports or systems to help them understand what each one of those numbers are. I'll break it down with each number. What's a +1? I have a few tasks that I'm doing for the day, but not overwhelming myself. What's a +3? Well, I'm taking on treatment and kids and court, and it's starting to get stressful. A 4, I'm getting overwhelmed. I feel like I'm going to break. Clients tend to get tearful. They want to jump out of treatment to get rid of some of the stress or those type of things. This is where we need to educate some of the clients on what to do with that stuff. And same with going to the part where if they feel very depressed. Well, what happens when we're shutting down too much? Well, maybe we need to talk about what's causing some of that depression. Are they feeling not connected to anybody, and are they feeling not loved, or those type of things? How can we find ways for them to feel that way, which is a natural thing to feel for a human being. We need to have those things. But some things, if you got them back to sleep and the food and basic needs, you're likely to get them quicker into building that tolerance. So start from the basics, and after you got the basics, then they're in the limbic system where they have emotions, and to a point where we can eventually develop the prefrontal cortex where they have logic. And that logic, once they can have some of that, we're going to give them a number system so they can start having awareness of what to do when they're in different ranges and different realms. And we're going to build it by bringing that awareness. People who smoke, there's a TED Talk even on this one, and I can't remember the name right now, but he'll say, let them smoke. And if they're going to smoke, say, I want you to notice the smells. What kind of smells you can smell if you're smoking? It doesn't smell so good. And what tastes are in your mouth. And you'll see the clients do this, like kind of gross type of feel to it. They know what that smell and that taste is. They don't like it. And you can talk about touch. What kind of chemicals are getting on your body? If you're going to smoke, then smoke, but notice, at least be aware and do that. When you bring enough awareness, you don't have to always address that their smoking is a terrible thing. You can address the fact of, like, let's be aware of what it's doing when we're smoking, and then that can help them create their own change, their own awareness, their own want and ego to do something about it. And just giving you a scale, because I tend to do the scale and it actually works great. I make it a homework assignment, I make it a lesson, it's part of the session, and we process on it. Clients love it, and I refer back to this quite frequently. I say, hey, what number are you at? Are you a plus or minus? Oh, I'm a +3, I'm very anxious today, and whatnot. All right, what skill do you know that can help you bring you down a little bit? All right, let's do some breathing real quick. Quick little breathing, and we're doing breathing exercises in both positive and negative situations, so they have that muscle memory. Muscle memory will equal them actually doing it when it comes to real life, and then talking about situations in real life that they could be using these skills so they can make that connection. So try something different. Okay, this is going to be very brief, but I want you to think about this. What is hyper-arousal? And when you come to the trainings, you're going to other things you're learning more information about, I want you to start thinking about a few things. What is happening with the client? Are they hyper or hypo-aroused? Are they very anxious or shut down? And when you're doing that, start noticing how that applies to all other trainings. You'll start noticing people have similar themes with teaching. Hypo-aroused, thinking about how people are shutting down or protecting themselves or closed off to protect their intestines or their diaphragm. Just remembering some of those. Emotional numbness, or if they're dissociating with you a lot in session, do the DES scale or the screening, dissociative experience scale, and that'll help you figure out what type of dissociation they're having and whatnot. This is something I use as a tool that gives me direction. Maybe it'll help if they have a hard time with mindfulness. Maybe we need to do something that can regulate them. Mindfulness is not just guided meditations. There's all different types. Maybe we need to get something that'll just go on a walk while we're talking to them. Change the environment. We've had a lot of repetition in this PowerPoint so far, but That's for good reason. That good reason is it's starting to stick in your mind. At least I would hope. So improve hygiene and sleep. Good hygiene is something that's important for the body so it doesn't get sick. Do they need sleep aids in the night? Also, caffeine consumption. People go from substances to caffeine because that's their next way to cope. Well, we need to have that discussion about how this is causing dysregulation too. Caffeine actually is a stimulant and affects serotonin. It creates more body response to go into more of a sympathetic nervous system, and then when they have too much, eventually they crash into hypo-arousal, or the parasympathetic nervous system. Exercise is another one that we want to look at, and when it creates the dopamine and endorphins, helps us regulate a lot more. A lot of people are now on cell phones and tablets and internet and all this stuff, and they're not getting out very much anymore nowadays. They're more staying indoors, which is an unhealthy thing if they're doing it for long periods of time. Taking breaks or self-care. I spend a huge chunk of my sessions, almost every other session, making sure I bring up how are you taking care of yourself outside of this session. It's not just come to session and work on trauma and then go home and you're done. No, they need to go home and find ways to regulate there too. What is something to give themselves a break? Improving eating habits. Can they improve maybe the way they eat if they're being part of this? Having healthier eating is going to have their body regulate a lot more too. Support network. So think about some of these simple skills to start with. Okay, so hyper-arousal. This is kind of a typical one. Maybe some of you heard it in sessions and have your own way of working through this. Something I do. I actually talk to people based on parts of themselves. If I start talking to a part of them versus them as a person, we're going to address it more of a behavioral way, and people are more receptive to that. And it actually helps them bring more awareness and talk to a different part of themselves, which is a way to self-soothe. So in this situation, I created the example of John where he talks to his wife, and his wife's always bringing up the son, and he gets really angry, and he says, you know, it's so destructive that you put our son in front and everything, and I don't like that. And I might respond with, this sounds kind of complicated, John. Like, it seems difficult for you to deal with that based on your history. Kind of validate and calm him a little bit, and he might respond with, I want to hurt her, or whatever. And we might want to check to make sure, see what he really means by that. But also, we can say, I can totally hear that angry part of you, and I wonder if we can separate that anger just a little bit from the other part of you, and see if we can't turn a little bit more of a rational brain back on board and get some distance from that perspective. I'm wondering, what's that angry part about? Kind of creating that separation. And some people, they take it really offensively in the beginning unless you start talking to the other parts. And then you normalize it as being okay. And if you stay regulated and you're confident, they're going to follow you, and more often than not. And so the key here is focusing on the sensations and emotions, and noticing, like, hey, what is that part about? Let's discover what these parts are. And then is there another way of thinking, another way to challenge these thoughts? It's kind of like cognitive behavior therapy, but with a spin, talking to parts instead of talking about the person as a whole. So try that out. All right, so now we've concluded with the window of tolerance. We've gone through what it is, the hypo-arousal vagus nervous system, which is the window of tolerance. We talked about different skills to use, different psychological, physical, and emotional ways to self-soothe. And there's probably more to this than what's in this presentation, but for the most part, we have a short period of time, so this is what we need in that amount of time. So just come with questions, and ask supervisors, ask other people who may have knowledge in this stuff about it, so you can learn some more. Don't keep yourself limited by not asking things. This is where you learn more by asking questions. And that's all we have for today, and thank you for watching.